Hi, I'm Rick Kaler. Thanks for joining me. When you hear the word trauma, what comes to your mind? Maybe it's a death of a loved one, or severe injury or illness, maybe a natural disaster, physical or sexual abuse, wartime combat. These are the things that I once thought of as trauma. What I've since learned is that events like these are descriptions of extreme trauma, not necessarily trauma. The word trauma is simply the Greek term for wound. According to Merriam-Webster, originally the Greeks used the word trauma for physical injuries, but now it's more commonly used to describe emotional injuries as well. And we know that a traumatic event can be both physical and emotional. A physical injury can result in lingering psychological symptoms even after somebody recovers bodily. Now, most of us have become familiar with the term post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD. The symptoms of PTSD, such as anxiety, depression, flashbacks, recurring nightmares, can stem from an original trauma that's either physical or emotional. But not all trauma is inherently extreme or considered a traumatic event. Less extreme trauma can include shock, upheaval, distress, chronic stress, physical or emotional pain. Grief is another one, or heartache from a lot of different sources in life experiences. By this standard, there isn't a human past the age of 2 that hasn't experienced trauma. Any trauma, extreme or not, can be emotionally debilitating if, and this is the key, it overwhelms a person. A chronic series of less extreme traumas can lead to experiencing the same symptoms as an acute one-time traumatic event. The impact of being exposed to a lot, multiple prolonged stresses is called complex trauma. So examples could be repeated incidences of stress, okay? If it happened just one time, not a big deal, but over and over and over and over and over. Emotional abuse or neglect, again, one time, not a big deal, but if it happens over 5, 10, 15 years, especially of a child's first years, that can be incredibly impactful. The same thing with criticism, over and over and over. Chaotic family dynamics, or maybe a minor chronic illness like asthma or significant allergies. So, you might be wondering, what does trauma have to do with money? Well, because money is so integral to all aspects of our life, it touches everything we do. Distressing or disturbing financial experiences can overwhelm someone and become a traumatic event. They can be the cause of PTSD or complex trauma. Dr. Galen Buckwalter, a research psychologist, defines financial PTSD as the physical, emotional, and cognitive deficits people experience when they can't cope with either abrupt financial loss or the chronic stress of having inadequate financial resources. Now, while both of these circumstances certainly qualify as financial trauma, this definition is pretty narrow. There's just a wide variety of financial events and circumstances, even ones that could appear insignificant to others, that could be traumatic for the person involved. Let me give you some examples. A chronic worry or fear around money, regardless of your income level or your net worth. A sudden significant change in financial circumstances, which could be a loss, but it could also be a gain, a windfall. Having a parent or partner use money to control and manipulate you, regret or shame over a past financial decision or circumstance, and any perceived financial wounding, especially when you're a young child. So all of these could qualify as financial trauma. And based on my experience, most financial trauma is experienced as children, not adults. So most problematic financial behaviors and disorders affecting a person's life today have their roots in childhood. It's just uncanny how common that is. And also, a trauma doesn't need to be specifically around money to symptomatically show up in a person's financial life. A trauma can show up in a multitude of different behaviors, not just money, but alcohol, workaholism, overeating, etc. A lot of sources of trauma, such as addiction, mental illness, chronic physical illness, or the death of a parent, include financial components, or they may have long-term effects on someone's financial behavior. So, some of the behavioral signs of financial trauma would include, and it's quite a list, gambling, hoarding, compulsive buying, overspending, underspending, financial denial, financial enabling of another person, financial enmeshment, typically with children, squandering sudden windfalls, and just repeated chronic poor financial decisions. So if you experience any of these behaviors in yourself, friend, or a loved one, there's probably some trauma at the root of it. Emotional signs of financial trauma would include depression, ambivalence, regularly reliving the original event over and over and over. Anger is common. Mood swings are very common. Overeating. There can be trouble concentrating. The person can just have chronic fear, shame, and anger. So the good news is that recovering from financial trauma is completely possible. The emerging field of financial therapy specifically helps people negotiate, resolve, and heal financial trauma. Thanks for listening.